Hello and welcome back, and that's right, we're carrying on looking at M.2 NVMe SSD upgrades for the PS5, and we're revisiting a drive that is technically not on the compatibility list. We are having a quick look at this, the new Seagate Firecuda 520. We've already got the drive inside. Let's format this drive. This isn't the first time we've tested this drive inside the PS5, but we can see there the benchmark on screen, rated at 5,637 megabytes per second. So it is just over the recommended 5,500 megabytes per second sequential read minimum. There in the background, you can probably hear my PlayStation getting a little louder as it boots up with a disc in the tray, because it is the disc version. But for now, let's load into our PlayStation 5 and start migrating data over from the internal PlayStation SSD and onto this Seagate Firecuda 520 SSD. Now, again, as highlighted, this is not, repeat, not the Seagate Firecuda 530, a drive that is very much on the compatibility list. This is the previous generation PCIe Gen 4 SSD that is only reaching maximum speeds of around 5,000 to 5,500 megabytes per second. So this is a drive that is technically not on the recommended list. And in today's video, we're going to be bench testing some slightly more aggressive games in terms of game loading and drive access. We're going to be moving some data over, and we're going to be bench testing a bunch of games. As we can see, if we go into the settings menu here, go into the storage menu there, and boom, you can see there at the top the Seagate Firecuda 520, not the 530. There's no data on it, and first thing we're going to do is copy some data over. So we're going to go for a bunch of games here. We're going to be going into here, moving data and apps. And during the course of this, by the way, we will be comparing how these compare against that of the games booting and loading directly from the PlayStation's own system. So for now, let's grab all of those big hefty games here. We're going to go for all of those there. We're going to go, some of these we've already tested in a previous video, but a bunch of them we have not. So we're moving over 367 gigabytes of data onto our 1TB drive. So let's move that data over now. We're going to go ahead and click OK and copy that data over. So once again, it is worth mentioning, every time we've ever copied data over from the internal PlayStation storage and onto an M.2 NVMe SSD, generally we do find that the performance and the speed and the time it takes is not really indicative of the fast reading and fast writing that these drives can do. And I do maintain there's definitely something happening in the middle, be it encryption, be it compression, be it security checks, block data certification, who knows. But copying data over, there's definitely some kind of bottleneck happening in the middle. In the case of this system, with the SSDs having quite fantastic read performance and the destination drive here having write performance of nearly 5,000 megabytes per second, it is, this should be a lot faster than it is. So definitely there's some kind of transitional kind of bottleneck happening there between them. But this video is about bench testing how this under recommended specification SSD handles some of these top tier games that have some hefty read activity, much like of course Ratchet and Clank Rifts Apart. Now again, I'm not recommending this drive. I'm merely using this as a demonstration of showing that these drives can do the job. They are noticeably cheaper than the higher tier equivalents. The Firecuda 520 is a good, decent 10 to 20% cheaper than a Firecuda 530. So you can get larger capacities for more money. However, if throughout the later stages of the console's lifespan, we notice that games become more demanding, or PlayStation changes its recommended minimum threshold and therefore stops games booting, this may be a problem down the line. And that's why I find it very difficult to recommend these drives that are under the recommended minimum sequential read. But for now, rather than have you guys waiting around watching a bar to load, I'm going to fast forward to the completion of the moving of the data, and then we're going to start testing out some of the boot times on these games. Okay, so our games have transferred over. If we have a quick look, we can see, for example, Doom there, the M.2 SSD storage on the bottom right, and we can go through to a bunch of them. We can go to Grand Theft Auto as well, M.2 SSD there. We can go to Ratchet and Clank, have a little look down there, boom, M.2 SSD storage. Then we've got Resident Evil Village, M.2 SSD storage, and Demon's Souls there. We can go through that, and there are all of the M.2 SSDs, all of the games on the M.2 SSDs, and we're ready to rock. The first game we're going to be going for is Doom Eternal. This is a PS5, there's originally a PS4 game with the PS5 upgrade with all the graphics ramped up as much as possible. If we go into the storage manager, as we can see there, all of that data has been moved over. And for now, let's start making our way into this game. But what I'll say from here, we're not going to be measuring how long the game takes to load to the title screen. Remember, there is a disc in the PlayStation, so you can hear that humming there in the background as it loads up. But again, it's worth highlighting, we're not going to be measuring how long this game takes to load from the PlayStation boot sequence, because that is already largely uncontrollable due to all of these publisher logos that cannot be skipped. We're going to be booting this game directly from a save spot on the title screen, and we're going to be versing it side by side against the same game loaded in the same fashion from the internal PlayStation SSD. So we're going to get onto that title screen, we're going to skip past the login sequence there, go through all of that nonsense there, and we're going to compare these. So let's count down, 3, 2, 1, go. And we're going to load these up and see which one loads up the fastest. It's worth highlighting, I can't see what you guys see there on screen, so I can't tell you if that was quicker or not, but the counter on screen should give you some idea. Remember, we're not so much looking to see if this is quicker, we just want to know that it can maintain and keep pace with the PlayStation. If it's quicker, all the better. But right now, it's worth remembering that we are still dealing with an under required minimum SSD. So the fact that this can keep up in any way is always going to be a good thing. We really want to see this drive live up to what its potential to do, because it is still an incredible drive, even if this drive isn't quite as good as its bigger brother in the 530. But I think for now, I'd say this game's a success and we can move on to the next game. Next up, it's Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and we're going to be running through two different save files here. We've got one right at the beginning of the game, and we have another one around 20 to 25 minutes in, where the game takes advantage of a large transitional segment where lots of stuff happens there on screen, with lots of read happening from the SSD. Remember, the Seagate Firecuda 520, not the 530. Once again, we can't skip these splash sequences here from publishers, so we're not including this, but what we're loading from, we're going to go for the first one at the title screen. This is the title screen recording here, and again, from this point, we're going to see how quickly it compares with the internal SSD. Let's count in 3, 2, 1. So again, incredibly fast there. We've tried this before, but I will say there's a tiniest little bit of lag there. Again, whether that was the recording or too much on screen, I'm not sure, but that I can honestly say that was the first time I've witnessed any kind of lag in the number of times I've loaded this save for other videos. I've used this game several times for bench testing higher performing and more recently released SSDs, and that was genuinely the first time I've ever seen any kind of frame rate drop there with all of those assets being collected from the system. So it's going to be interesting to see if that really was just a one-off or something we should be concerned with, and to highlight the point of some drives not being fully compatible there. But again, we seem to be having no assets problems here, so I think that's running fine. So let's carry on into the next segment there. But for now, I think this is still running quite good. I believe we have one more cutscene segment here, and we're going to end it just before there. But for the most part, we should do absolutely fine there while we get this game and wait for it to load up the next area, get that loading, lots of stuff on screen, and not give the console any time to slow down. But for now, I'd say that's fine. I think it's time for us to move on to our next save spot there. So if I quit out of the game there, make our way back onto the title screen, we can get ready with the next one. Again, we're loading from a different save spot here. From this save spot, this is again a short while into the game. And again, we'll have it on screen side by side. 3, 2, 1, let's go. So this is an on-rails segment, but it's worth highlighting. There's still a lot of control, a lot of graphical manipulation. You can control the camera. You can do a lot of stuff here throughout this segment. And again, this isn't some cage segment where you don't have any form of control. There's still a lot of assets being generated during this. You can probably tell that by the simple fact that a lot of the movement I'm making is different to either of the screens there, to give you some idea about the level of control that's going on here during that segment. But again, as we go through it, there's still a lot of freedom, a lot of asset generation. There's none of the slowdown that I noticed. That may have been a one-off, but who's to say? It's still, I'd say there's still enough of a concern to be worried about that. And as we exit this, we're going into an unstoppable cutscene there. And what I'm going to do now is I think that's enough for this game. I think for now, that's still a pretty good test. I'll be interested to see how that compared later on against the internal SSD. But it didn't feel much different. But for now, let's move on to the next game. And on to Resident Evil Village. For those that aren't aware, Resident Evil Village, again, a game that was multi-platform. This is the PS5 version. You can hear the humming there of the PlayStation reading from the disc. Don't worry, none of the game assets are being pulled from the disc. They've all been copied over. The disc is merely used for authentication and you won't hear it after a while. Don't worry, that's not persistent throughout the whole video. But for now, we're just waiting for the game to load up from there, and we're going to be loading two very distinct save spots. One in the early stages of the game, another one later on in the game where we're going to get the game to go through several areas at once and pull a lot of assets. If you watch my other videos, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for now, the first save is going to be escape from the castle, and from this save, again, we load up inside the castle, and normally this takes anywhere between 2 and 3 seconds. The Firecuda is one of the fastest to load this, so it'll be interesting to see what the older generation Firecuda 520 does. Let's go. Loading into the game there. It did feel like it was slower this time than we've seen previous ones before in the game here. It's a little dark, I know, but the game is still seemingly loading at normal speed, even though my character is getting absolutely mullered here in the dark. But again, loaded up pretty quick for us there. I think we're absolutely fine to say that that loaded without a hitch. Again, how much assets are being generated on an internal closed environment like this? There's an argument for and against that, hence why we're double testing Resident Evil 5. But for now, I think that's good enough for me. Let's move on to our second save there. Quit the game, go back to the title screen, and from here, we're going to load up that second save spot. And this is later in the game. And during the course of this test, we're going to run all the way through the game and back to the village in the hope to see just how far, if there's any hidden loading. Generally in a game like this, if the game is having difficulty keeping up with you generating more and more assets, they'll introduce freeze loading with a screen has to pause while it loads. But for now, let's go ahead and load this up. 3, 2, 1. And it's a lovely quick loading, just like we've seen before. And from this point, I'm going to run all the way back to the beginning of the game. And again, I appreciate the light on screen is a little dim. The original capture for both of these were recorded on different PlayStations there, with the PS5 version, the internal SSD recorded on a different PlayStation there. And unfortunately, that PlayStation had different contrast settings that were not picked up during capture, because the capture recording screen has its own default overlay with OBS. Consequently, that is why the PS5 screen recording there is slightly grayer and more pixely, because of that contrast there. But that said, as we run through it, we're seeing no slowdown. We're still running there on my recording at 60 frames. Whether that carries over into the recording there for YouTube, I'm not sure. But both the original SSD playback and this are running at top speed there. Lovely to see. And as we run through the game, nice and sharpish, making our way back to the original salesman guy in the altar. There's been no slowdown there. Lots of assets. We've seen the loading icon in the top left, just to be expected. But again, all those reading of assets have been absolutely fine. and we're back here at the merchant. Let's make our way into the next game. Okay, and on to our next and last game. We're going with Demon Souls, the launch title from PS5. Let's see how the Firecuda 520 deals with this. Now, this game here, it should be said, has some incredible load times, even with the big open world areas. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that impacts when taking advantage of the Firecuda 520 versus how fast some of these games are meant to load. So for now, let's skip ahead with some of these publisher screens here. Unfortunately, we can't, which is super annoying sometimes. Again, as we go through this. So the first test is loading directly into the Nexus hub world here. We're loading from a pre-existing save spot, and we're not going to be connected to online. This can be completely offline. Starting now, 3, 2, 1. And we're in the world. No slowdown from what I can see there, running absolutely fine. There at the central hub world there, I'm seeing no difference, no difficulty whatsoever. We seem to be absolutely fine there in what we are doing. I'll be honest, that's exactly what I would have liked to see. Let's go into another save, but not a save this time. We're going to load from an archstone, and we're going to go to the smithing grounds. And again, normally this takes somewhere between 5 to 6, maybe 7 seconds. Of course, you on screen, you're going to be able to see these side by side. But for my part, let's go straight in and load this up. 3, 2, 1. And we've loaded into the world there. From the looks of things, we seem to be doing absolutely fine. We can run into the world, carry on. And again, no difficulty there. If we run around into the game there, I'm going to be slightly careful not to get absolutely hammered by a boulder here. And, oh, no, nearly get myself killed. But yep, for now, absolutely fine. No slowdown. Still running at the nice 60 frames per second there. We are running performance mode on this. So again, absolutely fine there. And I think that is good enough for me. Let's make our way back to the bonfire, and for now start loading into a completely different archstone there. So again, the game is still looking pretty darn good. I know the capture does lower the res just a little bit for you guys there, but for now the Firecuda still seemingly is doing what it's doing. I can't obviously vouch for the longevity of this, but I will say that for me it's still running spectacularly well for a drive that is under the recommended minimum. Whether that is, you know, something to factor in later, I'm going to let you decide. Me personally, I'd still rather get a drive over the recommendations. But for now, let's go into that other save spot there with the Gates of Boletaria. We're going to go for that in 3, 2, 1. And that felt pretty neat, that felt pretty spot on for me there. Seemingly we've got loaded in quite quickly indeed. And again, running straight through the game, we've got all of those assets there on screen. Trying not to get myself killed there. But again, they're all seemingly loading quite well. And yes, we're absolutely fine to run through. There's no drop in frame rate, no slowdown, no hidden loading. We seem to be absolutely fine there. Again, if we keep running all the way through, we'll just keep going. Just to do a little bit more resource gathering there, because I know we can run quite far through this area if we cut through the middle. And again, we're not going to give the game much time to have to hold back on loading some of those assets there. And again, carrying on nice and fast. The game isn't slowing down at all. We've still got all of those lovely rendered graphics there on screen. Unsure if the dragon's going to do us in, but for now I think this is still running absolutely fine, exactly what we'd like to see. And again, no slowdown, no drop in frame rate, no difficulty in loading. I think for me this is still doing very, very well indeed. I'd be happy to call this a success, but again, it will be interesting to see just how far we can take this before my character definitely dies here. So to wrap things up, what I think we should do is move all of these games back to the PlayStation. Just to double check that that read is going to be absolutely fine, and maybe talk through a summary of what we've done today. So again, moving all of those games back to the internal storage there. Again, moving them all over 361 gig. Let's fire those over. And again, of course, there is going to be that bottleneck. Now, it has been raised on multiple websites that the internal SSD for the PlayStation, although it has spectacular read speed, its write speed is slightly lower, or I'd say slightly noticeably lower than a lot of the high-tier SSDs we're seeing these days in the Firecuda 530, the SN850, the Aorus Gigabyte 7000, the Sabrent, the Samsung 980 Pro, all of those. So again, we're not going to be able to measure true performance here during the transition of this data, moving it back to the storage. This merely emulates that there is most certainly a bottleneck. But the Firecuda 520 is still, to my eyes, still able to play a lot of the modern games on PS5 if used as an external storage, expanded storage. However, it is still less than the recommended minimum, and although it may play all of the games now, there's no guaranteeing that as game development improves and how developers make the most of the storage and the power underneath the bonnet in the PS5, that one day that drive doesn't become a bottleneck. For now, until Sony fully release the PS5 software update to enable the SSD expansion slot and solidify what the recommended minimums are, play it safe and either go for the likes of the Firecuda 530 or hold off and see if this drive makes the cut later on. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If you have found this video helpful, click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe, and we will be comparing the performance of this drive versus that of the Firecuda 530 very, very soon. So do stay tuned for that. But otherwise, I will see you next time.